Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Continuing Stitches by A.G. Howard. 2. The Collector. Pa showed up the morning after he punched Clover, as apologetic and humble as a dog caught in the act of peeing on his owner's rug. I'd like to think it was the sight of her bruised and swollen mouth that did him in. But why would it bother him any more than the busted cheeks and black eyes he'd given me and Clover in our past? Whatever it was, I chose to be grateful because something broke him good. I could have sworn I heard the sickening crunch of hollow bones as he knelt in the yard and begged us to forgive him. I wished he was cracking beneath my feet, like the skeletal corpses on that fated morning we found Ma disappeared. After Pa's apology, I didn't remember much of the conversation. Only that he said he'd found an answer to our finances and his soul sickness. He had made arrangements for us to meet our Savior. Pa called him the Collector, and he was to arrive that afternoon. When the sun was midway over the mountain, beaming in hot yellow streams, Clover and I took the dirt road to the forest and climbed some magnolia trees to watch for our mysterious guest. Barefoot in cutoffs and sleeveless shirts, we swung upside down from our perches. In the months since Ma's disappearance, my favorite tree had become the one with the white split in the bark, starting at the lowest branches and running all the way to the ground. That breach in the wood showed up the day after Ma left. I was convinced that same lightning storm that struck her also struck the tree, which somehow made them connected. And this tree was still alive, so she had to be too. And one day she'd come back to us. As I swung in and out of the shade, beads of sweat crept through the top of my scalp like creepy crawling ants. I braided my wavy red hair without turning upright, tying off the end in a knot before dropping it so it hung like a noose from the network of branches. It shimmered in the sunlight, favoring a giant piece of cherry licorice that would be sweet and stick to my teeth. I grabbed my braid by the end and nibbled the dusty, brittle strands, almost surprised when it didn't taste of cherries at all. "Sage!" Clover hollered from another tree a few feet over. "Look, a motorbike!" There he was, as promised, coming up the dirt road wearing a modern suit, dress shirt, and a tie that looked out of place atop the old-timey sidecar motorcycle. Not a stitch of skin showed under his grown-up clothes. Even wore mittens, the woolly winter kind, that only had space for your thumb and then a place where the other four fingers sat snug and cozy, like baby chicks under their ma's wing. But even with all that, I could tell he wasn't much older than us. Skinny and just starting to get his muscles. Dappled with sunshine and shade, he took on a funny green tint as his bike rumbled beneath our canopy of trees. He roared past the trunks, looking up once and then down again before I could catch the reflection of my cherry licorice hair in his shiny black helmet. A flock of wrens followed in his wake, blackening the sky. They drove me and Clover from the branches in their haste to find perches. By the time we scrambled down and followed the boy's tire tracks up the winding road, he was already parked next to Ma's dried-up vegetable garden and banging on the front door with a black-fisted mitten. He held the handle of a red and white ice chest in the other covered hand. Pa opened the screen with a swing of creaking hinges, inviting the Collector across the threshold. Clover and I stepped in behind. The boy was taller than I originally thought, and leaner. We strode to the kitchen behind him, where Oakley sat with a plate of leftover gingerbread from the night before. A small electric fan blew crumbs and stagnant air around the room, its head revolving, as if taking us all in. Our visitor tugged his helmet free and laid it on the table. My tummy did a flip, fascinated and repelled by what I saw, mainly because I couldn't see anything. He wore a mask made from a soft tan cloth, like the chamois Pa used to dry his truck after a wash. The edges were gathered at the boy's neck under his shirt collar and secured with the tie. 2 holes were cut, big enough to show soulful brown eyes and dark lashes. And there were slits for his nostrils, which was the only way he could breathe, since there wasn't a hole for the mouth. The Collector stared at Oakley, who had a half-eaten gingerbread boy's leg drooping from his lower lip. My brother's freckled face twitched, on the verge of either tears or hysterical laughter. And when the gingerbread plopped into his cup of raspberry Kool-Aid and splattered the white and ivory checkered tablecloth with red droplets, Pa sent him out to play. Oakley obliged, but not without grabbing the binoculars he'd made out of empty toilet paper rolls, tape, and plastic wrap. He perched on a stump outside the kitchen window and stared in through the fake lenses. Me, Clover, and Pa settled at the table. Ma's chair was left empty, as always. None of us touched it anymore, out of respect. Or superstition. The collector sat where Oakley had been, his mittened thumb tracing one of the perfect gingerbread people on the plate, as if mesmerized by the shape. The cookie caught on the wool, and he had to shake himself free. Afterward, he pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket and pushed it into Pa's hands. I realized then why our guest didn't need a hole for his mouth. It appeared he wasn't much of one for words. And Pa didn't like to read out loud, so he slipped the paper to Clover, since she was the one who always volunteered when Ma used to teach us our lessons. Clover cleared her throat and read, trying to conceal the lisp from her missing teeth. In Matthew 5:29-30, it says, "If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be damned." Her hand shook, but she continued. "If the foot leads you astray, remove temptation. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Feet, eyes, ears, tongue, and hands. That will be the order of dismemberment. Payment to the amputee is $10,000 per piece." Clover's blue eyes fluttered, and she looked up with a flushed face into Pa's watery gray gaze. "Amputee? It has your signature." I could see the wooziness overtaking. I helped her into the faded petal-pink bedroom we shared, guiding her onto the bottom bunk. When I returned to the kitchen, Pa told me everything. How he'd been arrested for drunken, disorderly behavior the night before. How the collector, under the employ of a wealthy doctor who was rumored to have found religion and moved here from a big city to study folk medicine and its ties to the Bible, had brought a note that offered Pa bail. The condition was Pa agreed to help the doctor prove his new theory, that godly qualities were transferable through skin and bones. Supposedly, the doc could make Pa a better man by switching out a specified map of body parts with a good person's cadaver pieces. In keeping with the Bible verses Clover had read, there were 5 bodily sectors most inclined to sin. And if Pa were to trade out his offensive parts for better ones, he could be the kind of parent he wanted to be, a substitute for Ma and her productive, gentle ways. The only catch was that the doc was a recluse and refused to come out of his house to chop off any parts or stitch on cadaver pieces. No one was welcome to visit him either. So that duty had to fall on someone else. Pa had signed the contract in jail just to get back home to us. It was as good as done. I bounced a glare from him to the masked visitor, who was preoccupied with Oakley's plate of gingerbread again. "So you're going to do the amputations, then?" Instead of answering me, the collector lifted his dark brown eyes and held up his hands in the mittens, working them like lobster claws as he shook his head. Something told me it wasn't just his tongue that didn't work right, and I wondered how many other parts of him were broken. I studied the contract again, staring at the dollar signs. 10,000 per piece. I'd never seen that much money in my life. Lord knows we could use it. "There's no guarantee," Pa said, his voice wavering. "I could die, but either way we get paid, and you're the only one strong enough to help fulfill the donation, Sage." I thought again of the pile of chicken bones out in the yard after the storm 6 months ago. How I wished Pa had been the one to run out into the lightning to save our livestock. Then maybe Ma would still be with us. Not a day went by when I didn't fantasize about how much better life would be without his drunken rampages. Without him. That's all it took for me to nod and force my tongue to work. I'll do it." As if coming out of a trance, the collector reached into his pocket and handed off a business card to me. "Cut clean through the bone and cauterize the raw edges." I frowned and looked up at him. His gaze stayed on mine for an instant, and then I thought I saw pity there. Or maybe regret. Then he handed off another card, of which he seemed to have an endless supply. This one had post-surgical instructions and was a promise to return when the deed was done. It said we wouldn't need to contact him. He had ways of knowing. The collector stood and, without our offering them, carefully wrapped the gingerbread people in a napkin and dropped them into his jacket pocket. Then he put on his helmet and left.